Hi, folks. My name is Girish, the host for Back to Basics, another Back to Basics for another week. Today, we're going to be talking about, we're going to be talking about the weakness. We're going to talk about self-care. We're going to talk about self-learn. We're going to talk about toxic. We're talking about positivity. Those are the words that we'll be using today in this episode. So, why is that needed? Well, we'll figure that out when we get into the episode today. And the person that we're going to speak with is Rachel. Just spoke with her a few minutes ago, and she understands my process. She understands what this whole Back to Basics is all about. And I'm glad and very fortunate that she is here on my platform, and we'll discuss about the stuff that we just talked about a few minutes ago. So, Rachel, how are you? And thanks for coming on Back to Basics.
Thank you so much, Girish. It's really lovely to be here.
Thank you so much. So before we get into the details of what you do, what you don't do, and all the stuff that I've talked about earlier today, what does Back to Basic mean to you?
Back to Basic means, to me, weeding through all of the stuff that we don't need anymore so that we can live the kind of life we were put here to live. You know, you used the word toxic just a minute ago, and somehow in our lives, we end up with a lot of toxicity, some of which we didn't really bring on ourselves, but we've kind of had to move through. And so going back to basics means stripping all that away so that we can really connect with our true self.
Yeah. So Rachel, thank you again for all that, and thank you for coming on the show. Definitely honored for you to be here. You know, the word that I've used earlier today, I've used self-care and toxic, right? And it seems like we're doing less of that, or are we doing more of that? What are your thoughts on that?
Well, we have to look at a timeline, right? Are we doing less or more compared to what timeline? You know, there have been certainly times in history where it was all about self-care and indulgence and things like that. But I think that self-care has become more of a focus now, especially since the pandemic. We were all kind of sent to our collective rooms to think about what we've done, during the lockdown. And a lot of people have been able to recognize that the way that they were living prior was sort of like sleepwalking through their lives. Get up in the morning, get dressed, go to your work, and you don't even maybe like your job. And then you come home and you don't have time to spend with your family. So when we were all kind of asked to be at home, we started to realize, a lot of us, not all of us, certainly, that there's more to life than just kind of sleepwalking through our scheduled day. Began to realize that I need to take care of myself a little more. And we've seen, so many people quitting jobs that weren't serving them anymore, even if that meant they weren't bringing in the income that they used to have, because our hearts, our souls are so much more important to us. So yeah, self-care doesn't just mean going to a spa or taking a bath or taking a walk. It means, how are you talking to yourself? You just spoke about self-talk, and that's also the name of my podcast, which is Self-Talk with Rachel Astarte. So how we speak to ourselves is so important, because that is also, I would say, the most important form of self-care. That's the dialogue going on in our heads all the time. We're making decisions about how to take the next step. So it's really important for us to be gentle with ourselves and kind to ourselves.
Right, Rachel, thank you again for that. Let me ask you this quick question here. Do you think, I guess we'll take as a COVID as a situation, but I rather think in a different way, out of the box. Do you think that we're listening more versus not listening as what we used to back in the days? What are your thoughts on that?
Listening? Is that what you said? Yeah. Listening what? To each other, to ourselves, to the world around us?
What I've noticed is that now that people are getting into the podcast world and they're getting into the radio world, they're getting into the listening mode, right? And it seems like they're listening a lot and learning a lot versus listening and just leaving it out the other ear.
Yeah, it's supply and demand, isn't it? It's a lot of people. We're at a very important juncture in humanity right now. It's it's time for us to evolve, really evolve the way that we show up in the world, and begin to be more of a community than just sort of looking out for yourself. And so I think podcasting and people are reaching out in a way to say, are there more people who think like me?
Right.
And can I learn from other people, especially because of the pandemic and the lockdowns and all that? We got very isolated. And so to be able to tune into a podcast like yours and say, let me learn from other people, since I'm not going out into the world, you know, and interacting with people. And what's so beautiful about podcasting is there's so much out there, and you can decide, what areas of my life do I need improvement, and and what are these professionals offering me? And then you can decide, does that sit with me well? I like some of it, but I don't want to keep all of it. And it's it puts everyone in such an empowered place, I think.
Yeah, for sure. Thank you so much, Rachel, for answering that question. Self-criticism and self-love. What are the differences for you?
Yeah, so that's such a great question. How do I dive in? So we can be critical of ourselves. We can be critical and say, like, I don't like how I handled that argument with my partner, right? We can say, I don't think I was nurturing and caring in that. So you can criticize yourself, but that's also a form of self-love, right? I want to be the kind of partner where I'm not calling my partner names or acting out of anger or whatever. So we can be critical and be acting out of self-love. But I think what you're referring to is more just kind of beating up on ourselves, right? You're not good enough. You're not smart enough. You're not pretty enough or handsome enough, or you're not making enough money, or you're not successful. These are self-criticisms that are contained. They don't help you to evolve. They just burn you out. Right? So how might we apply self-love to those kinds of statements? Remember, all self-criticism in one form or another is trying to help you improve, because it's saying, well, you're not doing this thing right. But unfortunately, that's where we stop. We go, yeah, you suck. You know what I mean? Instead of saying, okay, I didn't express myself really well at that last board meeting. So let's see, how can I do that differently next time? That's self-love. You take it to the next level and you say, not that I'm a bad speaker, or not that I don't know what I'm talking about, or I'm not ready, because that's imposter syndrome, right? It was like, I haven't stepped up into enough power to have this position. You say, well, how can I improve? That's a form of self-love. It's like, okay, I didn't do it well that time, but what do I need to improve myself so that I can continue on the path that I chose?
Yeah, so thank you again. You know, there has been situations, and I'll give you an example. There's a person that I was reading some article. He's doing his inner soul searching. And what he has figured out is, after so many years of corporate life, he's quit his corporate life, and he went to his inner journey for himself. And within those 5 years, he got divorced. And now he's leading his inner life right now, and he's enjoying his life. Is that considered critical to his spouse because the spouse couldn't understand? Or is it all totally self-care in this whole journey?
Well, obviously, I don't know the details of the divorce, so it's hard to make a blanket statement. But when one is feeling called to move along one's journey, that has to happen, right? That happens to, and we all at some point, or most of us at some point, have that wake-up call. Now, and I see this in my couples therapy with my patients, and also with individuals, when we wake up, a lot of things have to shift. The way we speak to ourselves, the way we speak to others, the things that we surround ourselves with. And sometimes our partners don't understand what's going on.
Right.
And, but sometimes they do. Sometimes they say, okay, you're going through this experience. I love you. I support you. I may not understand it, but I support you in your journey. And ideally that spouse also is going on their own journey. And it, again, may be different from their husband or their wife or whatever, or partner in general. So in this case, your friend had to go on this journey. And it really isn't his responsibility to bring his spouse along.
That's right.
Right. So, but if she was not able to meet him where he is and they had to separate, this happens sometimes. The important point is to separate as lovingly and compassionately as possible. So that there isn't any murkiness as you go along your path. And sometimes people do have to separate. I've been through it myself. If your journey is not aligned with your partner's journey and they're not willing to either support you or go on their own journey, sometimes that happens,
Yeah, so thank you again, Rachel, for explaining that, because I want people to understand that if you go through this journey, that person might not be there on your side, and that's okay sometimes. Move forward. And if they are there, that's a cherry on the top situation that you both are following that journey and learning from each other. So
yes.
That's a cherry on the top situation. Self-compassion, is that considered weakness or is that considered a strength?
Well, I would ask everyone listening to answer that question immediately, right in themselves. Like, how do you feel in your body when you hear that? Self-compassion, is that a weakness or is that a strength? I think a lot of people would say to be compassionate with yourself is a strength, right? I can't even imagine how it would be a weakness. I'm at a loss because it's like when you're being compassionate with anyone, right? Compassion does not have boundaries, right? We need to be compassionate toward our family members, our friends, the people we work with, the person ahead of us who just cut us off in traffic, the animals, plants, all, when we have compassion, we build up strength. And that's what happens over time, is then we're able to deal with conflict so much more easily when we come from a compassionate place. So I see it as an essential element to our individual strengths. Yeah.
So if it is a strength, but thank you again, Rachel, for answering that. But if it is a strength for self-compassion, then why they say that it's a self-pity or self-serving situation when it comes to self-compassion? Can you explain that if you don't mind?
Yeah. So that it would be self-serving to be compassionate to oneself?
Yes, that is correct.
Yeah, it's a great question. So, all right. So I'm working on my own self-compassion, let's say, right? So I'm being gentle with myself, I'm being forgiving with myself, and someone over there says, "Oh, you're so self-absorbed. Like, oh, it's about you. It's about you." And so, but here's the major difference. And this is what I write about in my book, Celebrating Solitude. When you are doing something for yourself, the mistake that a lot of people make is that they think that's where the work ends. Is that it's all contained. It's all about me. It's all about my happiness. It's all about, no, the reason that we have self-compassion, the reason we build a strong foundation of self is so that we go back out into the world and share our gifts with the world. If you're only doing the one part of it, I'm doing whatever I want, whenever I want, I don't care about anyone else. Yes, that is selfish, of course, by definition, right? But if you're doing it properly, if you're doing self-compassion, self-care, self-love properly, the whole purpose is to recharge your battery, fill yourself with love. And we all know, we can never have a cap on love. Once we have love filling us, then it starts spilling out. So you end up bringing it out into the world, and you feel more grounded and you feel more peaceful and compassionate, and that affects others. And that's the reason we do self-compassion. So it's quite the opposite of being selfish.
It is, yeah. So thank you again. We've been using this word in this episode so far called self, right? And you keep on loving yourself, you keep on nurturing yourself and caring yourself, and putting a whole bunch of positivity in there, making sure that your business is growing, making sure that you are fitting correctly, and fitness and health and all that stuff, right? But doesn't it sound like from the other side, not me, but the other side, that you are a egotistical person? It's like an oxymoron situation, isn't it? So, what are your thoughts on that?
Yeah. So and this is one of my favorite exercises I do with my patients too. So when we have a question like that, isn't it just self-serving to do, and egotistical? And I say, so what? Answer the question. So what? So
Right.
what if it is two other people, right? Remember, you said that you're saying the other people are looking in, going, "That's so egotistical." Well, so what? You know what I mean? That if they think that way, that has nothing to do with you and your journey.
Right.
That kind of brings back your friend who got a divorce, perhaps because of his journey. His spouse wasn't able to understand what he was doing, and therefore their relationship crumbled. What other people think of us is really none of our concern. What matters is our devotion to our path. And then remember, our devotion to our path feeds the rest of the world if we're shining our light properly, right? So here's compassion again. The person who says what you're doing is egotistical, we can show compassion to that person. They might not have woken up yet. They might still be in the rat race of, I have to do these things in order to be accepted. I have to find validation outside of myself through my boss, through my partner, through the Instagram, social media. Everybody else has to tell me that I'm doing the right thing. They're looking outside of themselves. They're going to look at you, who's taking on the very difficult work of self-work, as that's scary. I don't want to do that. That's, that's really, yeah. So when somebody else is saying that's egotistical, it's sort of like, to me, I hear that as, okay, they're not there yet. And I give compassion to that. They're not there. That's okay. But that doesn't shake me from my path, because I know what my purpose is.
Yeah. Thank you again, Rachel, for explaining that. And just to be clear, it was a article that I read. It's not a friend.
Oh, okay. It wasn't a friend. My apologies.
No, that's okay. We make a lot of mistakes in our lives, and we learn from our mistakes, and we keep on pushing ourselves to be a better person. Does that sound like that we're bullying ourselves to be a better person?
Yeah. It depends on how we approach it, right? So what does it mean to be a better person? We always have to define our terms. What does that mean to each individual person? Because there is no one size fits all. And that's the danger of all of the social media and all the new age movements, and that you have to do this in order to be enlightened and this and that. Really, we have to stop and drop into our bodies and decide for ourselves what is right for us. Right? So when we make mistakes, we have to make mistakes. There is not one genius on this planet or ever in history who didn't make a mistake. We learn from them. So when we stop seeing things as negative and positive, and we see them as just part of our journey, we're able to kind of strip them of the negative self-talk part of it, which is like, oh, I shouldn't have done that. Well, you did. So put a smile on your face, get back and try again.
Yeah.
So we don't need to be so hard on ourselves and say, well, this is good and this is bad.
Yeah. So thank you again, Rachel, for answering all that question. But can we talk about your book, if you don't mind?
Yeah, sure.
So I always ask this question to all my authors, and I wanted to understand from every author, because there's no right and wrong answer. Did the title come first, or did the storyline of the book came first?
The storyline of the book came first. Yeah.
And then how did it trigger you to come up with that story?
Well, honestly, I had just come back from a long trip in India, and I was working for an NGO. And I was about 37 and single. And where I was in India, that was like, well, you're basically dead. So, if you're single at 37 and a woman, yeah, no. So, and so I came back to New York City, where I was living, and I was like, oh God, what if this is the third trip I'd taken to India. It's like my second home. So I took this to heart. I was like, what if I am going to be alone the rest of my life? I'm pushing 40. I'm single. I have no kids. And I thought, well, if that's going to be my future, I really better be okay with that. And how do I learn to accept myself fully with or without a partner? And so that's how Celebrating Solitude came to be. Is I sat down and I thought, okay, let me look at all of my life. And, so the book is actually a guide to help you celebrate your own solitude. But it's a little bit of a memoir because it walks you through a little bit of my experiences as a solitary person. So my mother makes this joke that I have 2 sisters, and she likes to joke that she had 3 only children. And I think that says a lot. A lot of us are, I was very much into my solitude as a kid. So it's almost as like, yes, I played with my sisters, but mostly I really liked being alone. So what this book does is try to remove the stigma of solitude, because we see solitude as isolation. We see solitude as a punishment or a separation from our community, instead of seeing it as almost like a regenerative, sacred space where we can celebrate who we are and then bring that out into the world.
Yeah, thank you so much, Rachel, for explaining that and explaining the book. And I knew about the book, but I want people to understand that whole journey that you have got into, and it's not an easy life, obviously. I really don't know how you are going through that journey, but I understand that there are people like that who go through that, and it's a tough journey for sure. And that's why self-care is also definitely needed.
Yeah.
And that's why you created this monster for yourself and a bubble for yourself. Thank you again, Rachel, for that. But before you leave today, Rachel, if you don't mind, you have any last words for all my Back to Basic listeners and my viewers? And how is your Back to Basic journey so far?
Yeah. So one of the messages that I think is so important to share with everybody is to understand how powerful you are. Each one of us was put here in this life, in this body, to do something. And you are the only person who knows what that thing is. So whatever feels right to you, whatever your journey is, celebrate it. And you have that power within you to do that. And sometimes it takes talking to a professional like a therapist to help remove some of those blocks, which is what I offer in my practice. Even sometimes just for a single session with me, you can break through some of those things. And so it's really important to advocate for yourself, but also to recognize how important you are and how much power you actually have. Yeah. And so in terms of my Back to Basics journey, you mean in this episode or in general?
General, yeah.
It's always a pleasure, Girish, to be able to speak about things that I love and that I think will help people. And the more I get to do that on beautiful platforms like yours here, I'm always so grateful. So thank you.
Yeah, Rachel, thank you again for coming on the show and supporting me on this small podcast of mine, and spreading the word out there that self-care in this episode is honestly the awesomest thing in the world, and it's not a bad thing. So just keep on doing what you're doing, and thank you again for coming here.
My pleasure. Thank you.
Thank you. So guys, we talked about the toxic world that we live in and how self-care is so damn important in our lives, and it's not an ego thing, honestly. If people they think ego thing is a bad thing, let them think that, because you know what, you come first. Now, as usual, as always, there is a quote of the day, and hopefully Rachel will like this quote. The quote is, "Beauty is how you feel inside, and it reflects in your eyes. It is not something physical." Now, that's what we are talking about. Just taking care of yourself, and that's the main thing. Now, as usual, as always, what do we always say at the end of the episode? Everything in life goes back to basics, and that's what we did today, guys. Guys, take care, God bless, and keep on commenting on all my episodes because it helps me day by day, week by week, by listening to you guys. And as usual, as always, there are 3 things in every episode, including this one, according to me, that is always a hit, which is the content, the guest, and definitely the host. Guys, take care, God bless, and I will see you next time on Back to Basics. Take care, God bless.
Next week's episode on Back to Basics.
You know, like you said, there's no other way of putting it. Getting back to what matters.
Yeah. Thank you again, Amanda, for answering that question, and thanks for coming on the show and supporting me and supporting this whole mission that I have for my podcast.
Oh, I'm looking forward to being part of it.
Thank you. You know, when I heard this word or this phrase that you told me, you said granny dumping, and I didn't understand what that is. But then when I start looking around and sneaking around and researching.